Before we get into the three strength qualities, I want to make a distinction that most coaches skip. Velocity and acceleration are not the same thing. They're used interchangeably in coaching conversations all the time, and that's a problem because they describe completely different things. Velocity is distance per unit of time, so how far something travels in a given period. If an athlete runs 10 meters in 1.65 seconds, their velocity is about 6 meters per second. Straightforward. Acceleration is the rate of change of velocity, specifically change in distance per unit of time squared. It describes how quickly velocity is changing. The common example for this is a car. 60 miles per hour describes the velocity of the car. It's the top speed as an example. Going to 60 miles per hour in 5 seconds versus going to 60 in 10 seconds starts to describe the acceleration capability of the car. 0 to 60 in 5, the acceleration is greater than 0 to 60 in 10. The top speed is the same, so the velocity of both cars is the same, but the acceleration is different. The acceleration describes how quickly that velocity is changing. An athlete can be moving at high velocity with 0 acceleration. If their speed is constant, they're not accelerating at all. Acceleration only exists when velocity is changing. So why does this matter in the weight room? Because the formula that underlies everything we discuss in strength training is force equals mass times acceleration. F equals m times a, not velocity, acceleration. When we talk about how much force an athlete produces lifting a barbell at constant bar speed, the acceleration in that formula is the acceleration due to gravity, right? 9.8 meters per second squared. That's why a 100 kilogram squat produces 980 newtons of force at constant velocity. Mass times gravitational acceleration. The weight of the bar is a gravitational force, and the gravity is what the A in F equals m times a refers to at steady state lifting. But when the athlete accelerates the bar, pushes it faster, changes its velocity, the actual acceleration of the system changes. And that's where velocity-based training becomes meaningful. VBT devices measure bar velocity, and from velocity, they derive acceleration. And from acceleration, they can calculate the actual force the athlete is generating in real time, not just the weight on the bar. This is precisely why Bryan Mann's VBT framework separates strength qualities by velocity. Velocity is the measurable window into the underlying force and acceleration profile of the movement. Higher velocity at a given load means higher rate of force developed. Lower velocity under heavier load means more maximal strength expression. More importantly though, developing accelerative capabilities and developing high velocity capabilities are not the same thing. Again, this is a scenario where getting stronger isn't necessarily the answer. We don't adapt to what we don't do. So if we don't train at high velocities, we don't develop the abilities to move fast, even though we may develop good accelerative capability. Depth jumps and drop jumps look the same. They're not the same. Velocity and acceleration sound the same, they're not the same. Keep that distinction in mind as we go through the three qualities, because the difference between them is the difference between training for force production and training for force expression. Your athlete is strong, you tested it. The numbers are real, and they're still getting beaten to the ball. They lose 50-50 challenges and struggling in the moments that require them to produce force in a split second. Most coaches look at that and think they need to get stronger. That's the wrong diagnosis, because strength is not one thing, it's three things. And most coaches spend their entire career developing only one of them, while the other two determine most of what actually happens in competition. In this video, I'm going to show you the three strength qualities, why they're different, and how to program for all three so your athletes are strong in the ways that actually matter. I want to tell you about a conversation I had recently with one of my closest friends in this field, Dr. Bryan Mann. Bryan is a professor at Texas A&M, a pioneer of velocity-based training, and one of the most honest and rigorous thinkers in strength and conditioning that I know. He coined the term VBT. He's been publishing research and working with elite athletes since 1998, and when Bryan talks about the force-velocity relationship, he speaks from decades of real data, not theory. In our conversation, Bryan described the moment that genuinely changed his understanding of strength programming. He was doing force velocity profile work with a Division I baseball team, so looking at where athletes differed across the force velocity spectrum. And what he found stopped him cold. When he looked at the force end of the spectrum, the maximum strength expression, there was almost no difference between the All-Americans and the athletes riding the bench. 5-7% at most. Statistically, nothing meaningful. But when he looked at the velocity end of the spectrum, that's where the elite players separated from everyone else. The best athletes in the program weren't the strongest. They were the fastest movers. Bryan told me he was nauseous for 2 to 3 weeks after realizing this, because it meant he had been overweighting strength for athletes whose sports required velocity expression, and he was likely underserving them as a result. The line he landed on is one I've been quoting ever since. Strength may be king, but not all sports are a monarchy. And his clarification is just as important. Strength is great as long as it influences speed and power, but when it stops influencing speed and power, that's when we need to step away and look at other methodologies. Bryan had also written an article on elite fitness years earlier titled Speed versus Speed Strength. That was one of the first pieces I read that made these distinctions explicit. That article was a significant influence on how I think about this topic. I want to walk you through the 3 qualities that it helped me understand. Lesson 1, maximal strength. The first quality is maximal strength, the absolute amount of force the neuromuscular system can produce in a single effort. This is your 1RM squat, your peak deadlift, your best bench. It's the ceiling of force production, and it matters because everything else is expressed as a percentage of it. Bryan's VBT framework places maximal strength at the low velocity end of the force velocity curve, so movements below 0.5 meters per second. Heavy loads, maximum motor unit recruitment, the neuromuscular system working at its force ceiling. The reason maximal strength is called the foundation is exactly what Bryan described. It sets the ceiling that all other qualities draw from. An athlete who squats 100 kilos has a fundamentally different ceiling than one who squats 200. Everything downstream, speed strength, power, rate of force development, it all scales relative to that ceiling. But here's where coaches go wrong. They treat the foundation as the building. A foundation is necessary, but it's not sufficient. And Bryan's baseball data proved that the athletes with the highest force numbers were not the ones performing at the highest level. The foundation was present, the qualities built on top of it were missing. Lesson 2, strength speed. The second quality sits in the middle of the force velocity curve, what Bryan's framework calls strength speed, so roughly 0.75 to 1 meter per second. Moderate to heavy loads moved with velocity intent. Force and velocity are both present, but force is still dominant. In practical terms, this is your explosive strength work, so trap bar jumps, heavy medicine ball throws, Olympic lift derivatives at moderate loads. The athlete is producing significant force, but with clear velocity intent. This is the bridge quality. It connects maximal strength to the high velocity expression that sport actually demands. Coaches who move straight from heavy strength work to sport-specific speed work often see a gap in transfer because strength speed is where the nervous system learns to express force with velocity, not just produce it. Bryan's baseball finding illustrates this exactly. Those elite players didn't separate at the force end or the top speed end. They separated in the way they connected force to velocity. That's the bridge. And without deliberately programming it, athletes can build a high ceiling they never fully access. Lesson 3, speed strength and rate of force development. The third quality is the one most coaches neglect the most, and the one that determines most outcomes in competition. Bryan's Elite Fitness article defines speed strength precisely. Speed in conditions of strength, speed being the first priority and strength being the second. Lighter loads at very fast velocities, above 1 meter per second. The nervous system is prioritizing velocity above all else. This is rate of force development, not how much force, but how fast force is produced. When a defender takes a first step to close on an attacker, they don't have half a second to reach peak force. They have 100 to 200 milliseconds. The athlete who wins that moment is not necessarily the strongest athlete in the room. They're the athlete whose neuromuscular system fires fastest. Bryan said it directly in our conversation. Strength raises your ceiling, but velocity determines how much of that ceiling you can actually express. That line is worth sitting with because it means two athletes can have identical maximal strength numbers and completely different performance outcomes. If their speed strength and rate of force development are different, the outcomes are different. Speed strength is trained through light to moderate loads, moved with maximum intent. Plyometrics at the reactive level, jump squats, medicine ball throws, sled accelerations. The load on the bar is often lower than coaches expect. The intent to move fast is the stimulus. Bryan's entire VBT framework is built around this principle, that intent is the training signal, not just the weight on the bar. Putting qualities on the floor. Here are some exercise examples. So let's make this concrete, because the framework only becomes useful when you can look at an exercise and immediately know which quality it's developing. Think of acceleration and velocity as a spectrum rather than separate buckets. Every movement has both. The question is, which quality is being emphasized? Acceleration dominant exercises are the ones where the athlete is trying to rapidly increase speed from a low speed or static position. The goal is creating speed, not expressing it. The heavy sled push is one of the purest acceleration exercises you have. Start velocity is 0. The athlete is generating massive horizontal force requirements from a dead stop. Peak speed is relatively low, but the acceleration demand is enormous. The bar that barely moves in a maximal squat is the same principle. The athlete is attempting to accelerate a very large mass. Even if the actual velocity is low, the acceleration effort is high. Intent matters as much as the outcome. Sprint starts. The first 0 to 10 meters are another acceleration dominant pattern. Large forward lean, long ground contacts, high force production. The goal is not reaching maximum speed. The goal is increasing speed as rapidly as possible. Velocity dominant exercises emphasize moving at high speed once momentum already exists. The goal is expressing speed, not creating it. So flying sprints, where the athlete builds for 20 meters and then runs through a fly zone, are primarily a max velocity tool. The acceleration phase has already happened. So now the athlete is training maximum velocity, elasticity, stiffness, and efficient force application at speed. Drop jumps, as we discussed in the plyometrics video, fit here. So very short ground contacts, high reactive strength index. The emphasis is on velocity and reactivity at speed, not on how much force the athlete can produce from a static position. The force velocity curve. Here's where coaches get confused. The force velocity curve is showing that as external load decreases, movement velocity increases. So a heavy squat is force biased, a loaded jump is force speed, a jump squat is speed strength, and sprinting is velocity biased. But, and this is the key point, acceleration can occur anywhere on that curve. A heavy sled sprint and an unloaded sprint start are both acceleration focused. They just live at different places on the force velocity spectrum. The practical summary here. Acceleration is about creating speed. Heavy loading generally teaches athletes to create speed. Velocity is about expressing speed. Lighter, faster movements generally teach athletes to express speed. The best programs develop both. An athlete who can create speed but not express it is incomplete. An athlete who can express speed but can't create it is limited. Which brings us back to the 3 qualities and how they map to exactly this spectrum, connecting the 3. Here's how I think about the 3 qualities in program design with Bryan's framework as the foundation. Maximal strength sets the ceiling, heavy loading at low velocities. You cannot express force you have not developed. Strength speed is the bridge, so moderate loads with high velocity intent. The connection between what you can produce and how quickly you can produce it. Speed strength is the application. Light loads at maximum velocity. This is what transfers to the field, the court, the moment that decides the match. The proportion of each depends on the athlete, the sport, and what the diagnostic reveals about which quality is limiting performance right now. Bryan Mann has spent decades studying the relationship between force and velocity. His work helped me understand that strength is not a single thing, and that the quality most coaches invest the most time developing is often not the one determining performance outcome. 3 qualities, different stimuli, different adaptations, different transfer to what actually happens in competition. If you want to go deeper on how to integrate all 3 into a weekly architecture, the Programming Architecture Workshop is where we build exactly that. The link is below. Subscribe if this landed, and next video covers MAS, the one number that personalizes every conditioning program. See you there.